The hum of the projector filled the room like static under skin. The air conditioner rattled faintly against the glass wall, cutting through the heavy silence of 30 executives pretending not to stare. I could feel every eye flick toward me, then away again, as though acknowledgement alone might make them complicit. On the far end of the mahogany table, Daniel Mercer, VP of Operations, sat with his arms folded across a navy suit too tight in the shoulders. Beside him, Ethan, his son, 27, fresh MBA, expensive watch, stared down at his tablet, pretending to scroll. The ValenCore rollout had failed 3 days ago. Today was supposed to be the autopsy. I stood at the front of the room, slide remote in hand, pulse steady. Our data shows multiple irregularities, I began. The metrics presented in last quarter's report were modified prior to upload. Timestamps indicate the changes occurred under analyst ID E. Mercer. My son's login, Daniel interrupted, his tone laced with warning. You're saying Ethan falsified data? I'm saying, I replied, keeping my voice level, that the numbers were altered manually. We need to understand why. A few seats down, the CFO shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed into their sleeve. No one met my eyes. Ethan finally looked up. His jaw twitched. There was a sync issue, he muttered. The system duplicated a field. I just corrected it. Except the corrections inflated performance by 17%, I said. The slide behind me changed automatically, red numbers glaring against white. The silence was sharp enough to cut through. Daniel's face darkened. Enough, he said, each word deliberate. We're not turning this meeting into a witch hunt. I glanced toward the board chair. No one intervened. The politics of bloodlines had more gravity than facts. Compliance has to review discrepancies, I said, quieter now but unwavering. It's not personal. It's procedure. Daniel leaned forward, voice low but carrying. You've embarrassed my son in front of senior leadership. I expect a retraction and an apology. The last word hung in the air like smoke. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down. The unspoken rule that truth only mattered if it didn't inconvenience power. My thumb hovered over the remote, frozen on the final slide. Unverified modifications, pending accountability. Then suddenly, the screen went black. My presentation cut mid-sentence. Daniel had muted my mic through the meeting control panel. He didn't even look at me when he said, "We'll handle this internally." Laughter, the nervous kind, rippled down the table. The meeting ended. Chairs scraped the floor. I stood still as the room emptied. Ethan avoided my gaze entirely, tucking his tablet under his arm like a shield. Only one person lingered, Marissa, from finance. She mouthed quietly as she passed, "Be careful." When the door shut, I let the silence settle. The projector's hum faded. In its place came the distant whir of the building's ventilation system, constant, mechanical, indifferent. I closed my laptop, unplugged the HDMI cable, and gathered my files. My reflection stared back from the black glass wall, composed, calm, but something in the eyes sharper than before. The company had always prided itself on culture. We don't make mistakes, we learn. But I'd just learned something too. That truth in this room was a liability. As I walked back toward my office, the hallway lights dimmed automatically, motion sensors lagging a beat behind me. The carpet muted my footsteps, but not the sound of my resolve settling in. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment everything began to unravel. Not with a scandal, not with an argument, but with one simple act of defiance. I refuse to apologize for accuracy. And somewhere, deep in the server logs, the truth was still waiting, patient, time-stamped, and impossible to erase.
Daniel's office is a terrarium for power. Glass on 3 sides, blinds snapped shut just enough to suggest privacy, not enough to grant it. A printout of the company values hangs crooked behind his chair. Integrity, clarity, courage. Whoever framed it forgot the 4th, inheritance. He waves me in without standing. Ethan is already there, perched on the visitor chair like an understudy who expects the lead will mysteriously lose her voice. HR has sent an observer, Paula, who sits to the side with a neutral notebook and a pen that never quite touches paper. "Close the door," Daniel says. I do. The latch clicks like a small verdict. "You created an unnecessary spectacle," he begins. "You implied criminal intent." "I read the logs," I reply. "They implied themselves." Ethan exhales hard. "There was a sync issue. I fixed the display fields. Everyone knows the dashboard has 17% inflation isn't a display issue," I say. "That's manipulation." Paula clears her throat, finding her line. "Let's keep this constructive." Daniel laces his fingers. "Here's what's going to happen. You'll send a note to the leadership list acknowledging you mischaracterized my son's actions. You'll apologize for the tone you took in the meeting. We'll position it as a miscommunication." "And the data?" I ask. "We'll fix the data," he says, already bored of the substance, "but not in public." Silence settles. The HVAC hums. Somewhere beyond the blinds, a printer starts and stops as if thinking better of it. "Your request conflicts with Section 9.2 of our Code of Conduct," I say evenly. "Material misstatements must be corrected with equal visibility. Compliance is obligated to notify risk." Ethan shifts. "You're making this personal." "It's not," I answer. "That's the problem for you." Daniel smiles the way people do when they're about to edit reality. "If you choose process over team, you'll step off ValenCore, effective immediately." "That's retaliation under 9.6, I say. Protected activity includes raising good faith concerns. Paula finally writes something. Daniel tilts his head at her. "We're discussing fit," he says, as if the word can launder intent. He swivels back to me, softening his voice. "Elena, you are smart, but you cannot humiliate people and expect to keep influence here. Be the adult. Send the note. We move on." I think of the projector going dark, of the board chair who didn't speak, of the company banner outside the cafeteria that says, "We measure what matters." "What matters," I say, "is the record." His jaw tightens. "Last chance." I set my notebook on my lap and open to a page marked in pencil. "Per change management protocol, all metric overrides require a CM ticket and dual approval. There is no ticket. The overrides occurred under analyst ID E. Mercer at 112, 117, and 123. The SAML trace shows authentication from Ethan's device, not a shared kiosk. If the credentials were compromised, we'll confirm with SIM event correlation." Ethan flushes. "I already told you this isn't a tribunal," Daniel snaps. Then to me, "You're off ValenCore, effective now. We'll discuss your future on Monday, assuming you can be a team player." Paula's pen pauses again, hovering like a drone. I close the notebook. Understood. His relief is visible. He mistakes my stillness for surrender. He stands to signal conclusion, extending a hand he doesn't intend me to take. "Compose the apology today," he adds. "CC me. We'll fix the optics together." "I won't be sending that," I say. The smile drops. "Then consider this a directive. And consider this my response, I say, just as even. I will not misstate facts. We let the sentence sit between us until it cools. He dismisses me with a flick. Parents do that when they think you'll be back to ask for the car keys. I step into the corridor where the glass steals voices and returns only shapes. My reflection looks composed. My pulse is a metronome, useful for timing, useless for panic. I walk past the framed awards, the IPO Bell replica, the sepia photo of our first warehouse. All of it is a museum of memory curated for donors, not doers. In my office, I close the door and turn the lock no one uses. The room smells faintly of dry paper and the lemon cleaner our night crew prefers. I slide open the top drawer. The USB is where I left it, labeled in my handwriting Audit 24B. Not company data, never that, but an index of pointers, hash values, and the kind of breadcrumbs that tell an independent reviewer exactly where to dig on company systems without me carrying a single proprietary file out the door. Leverage can be entirely legal when it's architectural. I line up 3 documents on the desk. Code of Conduct, tabs on 9.2 and 9.6. Incident Response SOP, page 7, escalation to risk within 24 hours. Whistleblower policy, anonymous channel and direct line to the audit committee. I do not call the hotline. Hotlines create stories. Stories create spin. I prefer procedure. I email Paula a single sentence. Please note removal from ValenCore immediately followed my raising a compliance issue. Logging for your file. No adjectives. No adjectives is how you keep your footing. Then I draft a second message. Subject, per standard procedure, independent review request. Recipient, Chief Risk Officer. CC, Legal Archive. Body, bullet points, timestamps, the neutral grammar of systems that do not lie. Before I hit send, I add one attachment. A signed memo to file documenting this morning's meeting. Names, time, location, the exact phrasing of the ultimatum. I export to PDF, add a SHA-256 checksum, and drop the hash into my personal notebook. Not because I expect a fight, but because I expect someone to forget what they said. I press send. The email leaves like a quiet elevator. No fanfare, no recoil, just descent. A minute later, a calendar invite pops into my peripheral vision. From Risk. Hold. Audit intake. ValenCore. 30 minutes reserved tomorrow, 0830. No description. No emojis. Blessedly adult. I power down my screen and, for the first time since the projector went black, allow myself one breath deeper than the others. Not satisfaction. Not even relief. Just oxygen doing what oxygen does. Showing up. Invisible. Necessary. Uninterested in applause. On my way out, I pass Ethan in the hallway. He looks past me like I'm drywall, then remembers to smirk. Rough day, he says. Just documentation, I answer. He doesn't understand the difference. His father taught him that narrative beats notation. Mine taught me to keep receipts. At the elevator, the doors part with a soft sigh. I step in and watch the office narrow to a postcard as the panels close. Somewhere above, the risk team is reading. Somewhere below, the lobby banner flutters in the conditioned air. We measure what matters. Good. I intend to hold them to it. Monday morning arrived like a bad copy of every other one. Same smell of burnt espresso from the break room, same forced laughter near the elevators. Only this time, conversations paused when I entered. Eyes darted away a second too late. That's the thing about guilt. It's louder than words. By 9:12 a.m., the company-wide email landed. Subject, project realignment and conduct review. From Corporate Communications. Body. Effective immediately, Elena Marquez will be stepping back from the ValenCore project to ensure an environment of constructive collaboration. We appreciate her contributions and remain committed to maintaining a culture of respect and accountability. Stepping back. Culture of respect. Corporate poetry for public punishment. I scrolled once, then closed the email. No surprise, no sting. I'd already seen the draft. Paula had accidentally copied me on a for review thread the night before. My name had been swapped out of the ValenCore org chart like a piece in a slide deck. I wasn't angry. I was documenting. By mid-morning, the whispers started. She snapped in the meeting. She embarrassed Ethan. She's lucky she wasn't fired. I passed them in the hallway, their voices thinning as I approached. It's strange how fast professionalism melts when hierarchy gives permission. Ethan was the new hero now, the prodigal son who held the team together under pressure. His name appeared in an internal highlight post, complete with a photo of him smiling in front of a dashboard I'd built. My desk light was still on when I reached my office, a quiet kindness from the night cleaner, who once told me she liked how I made the place smell like purpose. A small mercy in a sterile world. I sat down and reread my sent folder. The compliance report was now in legal's secure drive, encrypted, time-stamped, and acknowledged. One reply from the chief risk officer, curt but unmistakable. Received. Under independent review. No further correspondence needed. Exactly how I wanted it. Around noon, HR sent a meeting invite titled Transition Discussion. The kind that pretends to be about support but smells of liability. I declined it. Instead, I began sorting files, archiving documentation, and cleaning my workspace like a surgeon prepping an operating table. Precision has always been my comfort. At 1:07 p.m., Ethan walked in without knocking. His grin was polished, his confidence rehearsed. "Dad said I should come clear the air," he began, leaning against the doorframe. "Careful," I said without looking up. "Air here's thick with accountability." He chuckled awkwardly. "Look, you didn't have to make it so public. I was just fixing a glitch." 17% inflation isn't a glitch. I met his eyes. It's fiction. He straightened. "You think you're untouchable because you hide behind compliance. But in this company, loyalty matters more than rules." "That's why your father's office has blinds," I said, closing my folder. "To hide what loyalty looks like in practice." His smile faltered. "You're off the project. Just stay quiet and this'll fade." I stood, not aggressive, just tall enough to remind him that silence is rarely surrender. "Ethan, fading isn't in my nature. Documentation is." He turned without replying, the back of his neck flushed red. When he left, the air felt cleaner. The rest of the day passed in deliberate calm. I backed up personal files, returned my security key, and erased every trace of convenience that could later be twisted into misconduct. I moved like a shadow through the office, unnoticed, unbothered. Then, at 5:32 p.m., a notification blinked across my screen. Message from Corporate Affairs. Per your removal from ValenCore, please refrain from accessing shared compliance folders. This is a standard precaution during personnel transitions. They'd locked me out of my own department drive. Perfect. A predictable move. What they didn't know was that the audit trail already mirrored itself in legal's repository. The truth was safely beyond deletion. As I packed the last of my notebooks, I noticed something taped to my monitor. A post-it note in neat handwriting. "You were right. Check teams at 6. M." It was from Marissa in finance. At 6 sharp, I logged into our private channel. One message sat unread. A screenshot from the internal accounting log, time-stamped, authorized by E. Mercer, adjusting quarterly deliverables again, dated after the project had been closed. The caption under it read, "He's still editing the data." For the first time that day, I smiled, not out of malice, but clarity. Every attempt to bury me was only digging their own hole deeper. I closed the chat, slid the USB labeled Audit 24B into my pocket, and turned off the light. The hallway beyond my office was empty, silent except for the low hum of servers, constant, mechanical, honest. Tomorrow they'd wake to the sound of their own audit. But tonight, the truth was patient, encrypted, traceable, and waiting for its cue. Because I didn't need revenge. I had records, and records, unlike people, don't forget who silenced the mic. The office after hours is a different creature, stripped of performance, unmasked by fluorescent light. The walls stop smiling, the carpets stop listening. Only the hum of servers and the slow blink of routers remain, keeping quiet company with whoever is stubborn enough to stay behind. I'd become one of those ghosts, the kind who lingers after termination has already been drafted. The building recognized me by motion sensor, not name. It was 8:47 p.m. when I swiped my badge. The system hesitated for a second before unlocking, a digital flinch. My access would vanish soon, I knew that. But tonight wasn't about access. It was about closure. My desk looked untouched, but absence leaves fingerprints. A file slightly crooked, a drawer left open by someone pretending to help with the transition. HR's subtle theater of control. I ignored it. The documents that mattered were digital and already scattered like breadcrumbs across mirrored drives. I logged in using my remaining admin token. The system greeted me with the indifferent blue of compliance dashboards, data validation, access logs, encryption checks, numbers blinking like Morse code for truth. Project ValenCore, root directory, modified. User, E. Mercer. Timestamp, Friday, 10:32 p.m. He couldn't even wait a week before touching the corpse. Ethan had been editing post-closure, scrubbing inconsistencies he didn't understand. Each alteration left a trail, hashes misaligned, metadata mismatched, the digital equivalent of fingerprints in wet paint. I opened the raw audit stream. It unfolded across my screen, a symphony of evidence only a patient mind could love. Cross-referencing source entries with stored hashes, I began building what would later be known in legal's archive as the Marquez Report. A complete reconstruction of every unauthorized change. I wasn't hacking. I was preserving. There's a difference between theft and witness. By 9:30, the office lights flicked off automatically, plunging everything into the kind of darkness that feels earned. The glow from my monitor painted the room in grayscale. My reflection stared back, tired, sharp, unafraid. I poured the last of my cold coffee and took inventory. 74 altered entries confirmed, 3 deleted backups recovered, 1 unregistered VPN connection traced to Ethan's home network. Enough to burn reputations, but I wasn't after fire. I was after proof. At 10:02 p.m., I encrypted the compiled report under AES 256, double-hashed the file, and stored it in an off-site legal vault, the company's own compliance mirror. Then I drafted the message. To Chief Risk Officer, CC External Legal Counsel, via encrypted portal. Subject, per standard procedure, independent review request, ValenCore. Body,
Enclosed is documentation supporting audit escalation under Policy 9.2 and 9.6. Please initiate external validation. I am available for clarification if required. No further communication expected unless through counsel. I read it twice. It was surgical. No emotion, no adjectives, no oxygen for gossip. Then I attached Marquez Report Audit 24B.pdf and clicked send. The message left quietly, a bullet made of truth traveling through corporate fiber. I sat still for a long moment, letting the room exhale. Every betrayal leaves an echo, but what follows, if you're careful, is peace. Not the sentimental kind, but the procedural kind. The kind that lives in timestamps and signatures. A low chime startled me, a Teams notification. Marissa again. FYI, Ethan's bragging about fixing the metrics glitch from home. Guess he doesn't realize IT logs residential IPs connected to company VPN. Thought you'd appreciate the irony. I did. Greatly. I closed my laptop and began packing the essentials. Notebook, badge, the USB labeled Audit 24B. The rest, mugs, picture frames, certificates, belonged to a version of me that believed good work alone protected you. At the elevator, the night security guard nodded. "Working late again, Ms. Marquez?" "Just finishing some files," I said. He smiled faintly. "You always do it by the book." "That's the only way it counts," I replied. Outside, the rain had started, the soft, steady kind that makes the city sound clean. I stood beneath the awning for a moment, breathing in petrichor and neon reflections. Somewhere above, servers hummed on, immortalizing every keystroke. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed once, an automated reply from legal confirming secure receipt of materials. Nothing more. No thanks, no drama, just a line of text. File logged. External review scheduled. That was all I needed. I sat behind the wheel, hands resting on the steering, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a completed process. People think justice is emotional. It isn't. It's procedural, cold, deliberate, time-stamped. And as the windshield fogged under the rhythm of rain, I realized something simple, almost poetic. I hadn't lost anything. I'd just finished my documentation. Tomorrow, Daniel and Ethan would wake to an audit request they couldn't intercept. And for the first time since that meeting went silent, I felt something close to relief. Not triumph, not vengeance, just accuracy. Finally speaking in a voice they couldn't mute. The next morning arrived in grayscale. Even the sunrise looked hesitant through the office windows, as if the sky had read our code of conduct and decided to keep expectations low. The building breathed its usual artificial mint as I crossed the lobby, past the banner that promised, "We measure what matters." Good. I had. My badge still worked, barely. The turnstile gave a reluctant hiccup before letting me through. Somewhere in facilities, a flag had been set to expire me on command. Someone always thinks control is a switch. It isn't. It's a paper trail. At 8:07 a.m., 3 small things happened in rapid succession. IT revoked my share drive permissions. HR resent the transition discussion invite with a warmer font. A calendar hold materialized on the executive layer like mist. Mandatory board review. Audit findings. Project ValenCore, 1700, Boardroom North. Organizer, Risk and Legal. Attendees, Board, CEO, CFO, CRO, VP Ops. Optional, E. Marquez. Optional is what power says when it can't admit it needs you. I poured coffee that tasted like hot cardboard and watched the office practice normal,
People synchronized their smiles. Slack channels sprouted little green dots like obedient moss. Daniel strode past at 8:29, jacket off, tie already loosened. The walk of a man who thinks he's successfully thrown a body into a river. He didn't glance at me. Why would he? In his mind, the current had taken care of the rest. Ethan arrived 5 minutes later with a new haircut and an old smirk. He bumped fists with a junior analyst, loud enough for me to hear. "Closed the loop on that metrics glitch this weekend. Dad was right, keep it in-house." The junior nodded like a metronome that had never met a song. I opened my inbox. No fireworks, no replies. Just a single message from Legal Archive confirming that my report had been docketed for independent validation and placed under litigation hold. That phrase, litigation hold, the corporate equivalent of a bell tolling in the fog. You don't hear it if you're celebrating on a deck with music. You hear it if you're counting lifeboats. At 9:03, Paula hovered in my doorway with a diplomatic smile. "Time for our transition chat?" I declined, I said. She shifted her weight. "We want to make sure you feel supported." "I prefer documented," I replied. Her pen twitched like it remembered last Friday. She swallowed, recovered, and offered a handout titled Navigating Change with Grace, pastel arrows pointing nowhere. I didn't take it. She left it on the credenza like a sympathy casserole. The day stretched thin. I worked quietly, the way one packs a life into labeled boxes. No fuss, no nostalgia. I archived personal notes, exported my calendar, signed off on an expense that had waited in limbo because no one wanted to be the adult who checked the math. Each small act came with a click, a tiny closure. I removed my plants from the window ledge and wiped the dust rings they left behind. Dust, like truth, accumulates in places people don't look. At noon, Marissa pinged me a single period, our shorthand for check the finance queue. I opened the ledger view and saw it. A journal entry flagged by the system, adjustment for reporting clarity, authorized by E. Mercer, timestamped post-close. The note field contained 3 words, per leadership guidance. Cute. He'd given the audit a breadcrumb and a motive in 7 keystrokes. I didn't forward it. I didn't need to. The finance system synced with risk at end of day. I just took a screenshot, printed it to PDF, saved the checksum to my notebook, and returned to my coffee. At 14:11, a door down the hall clicked. Quiet footsteps. The chief risk officer appeared, a woman who wore neutrality like a tailored suit. She didn't sit. She looked at me, then at my half-packed shelf. "You received the invite." "Yes." "It isn't performative," she said. "We're presenting findings to the board. Independent validation is complete." "Understood." A beat. "Do you intend to attend?" "Optional is an interesting word," I said. Her mouth folded into something almost like a smile. "It is." She slid a plain white envelope onto my desk. No logo, no flourish. "For your records." After she left, I opened it. 3 pages. On letterhead this time. Subject, Notice of Audit Escalation, ValenCore. The text was clinical, respectful, absolute. It named the discrepancies, the credential trail, the policy triggers, the necessity of disclosure. It named me once, only once, as the reporting party acting under 9.2/9.6 compliance obligations. Then it disappeared me into procedure, which is exactly where I wanted to live. By 3, word had leaked without anyone daring to call it a leak. People stopped laughing in hallways. Slack overlays slowed, timing out under the weight of drafted messages nobody sent. An engineer rolled his chair to my door and rolled it back again when he saw I looked up. Fear rustled like paper. Daniel did a lap of the floor at 15:47. He had the polished paleness of a person who'd learned bad news and decided to win the argument by standing. He stopped at my threshold, not entering. "The board review this evening," he said, as if I didn't read calendars. "It's redundant." "Redundancy prevents failure," I said, and let him decide which kind. He wet his lips. "We could still show unity." "I don't show anything," I said. "I submit." He laughed once, a sound like a lid snapping shut. "You've always preferred paperwork to people." He left before I could thank him for the compliment. At 16:52, I took the elevator up. The cab smelled faintly of raincoats and pens. When the doors opened, the executive floor greeted me with a hush that wasn't reverence, it was calculation. The receptionist's smile was stitched at the corners. The boardroom north glass held the city like a map you couldn't afford. Inside, the long table had been set for ritual. Name placards aligned, water bottles equidistant, a screen asleep with the company logo. I took a chair at the far end, optional, where witnesses sit when they've already said everything that matters. People arrived in curated order. The chair came first, then the CEO, then the CFO with a stack of papers nervous enough to sweat. The chief risk officer placed a thin laptop on the table and plugged in a cable like a surgeon finding a pulse. Daniel slipped in just before the hour, tie fixed, shoulders squared. Ethan followed a beat behind and took a seat against the wall, the first smart thing he'd done all year. The screen woke. No preamble music, no corporate flourish. White slide, black text. ValenCore, independent findings. Under it, 3 lines. Unauthorized data modifications substantiated. Credentialed access, Mercer. Post-close adjustments detected. No adjectives. Adjectives are how people lie to themselves. Risk began. Her voice was even, the water level in a lock. She described the system design, the controls in place, the CM ticket protocol, the failed approvals. She clicked to the next slide. Timestamps stacked like vertebrae. A graphic traced the login signatures to Ethan's device, to his IP, to his weekend fix. Another slide, the financial echo, Marissa's ledger entry, labeled in a way that would make any auditor sit up straighter. The CFO rubbed 2 fingers together, his tell when a number hurts. The CEO's jaw drifted forward, the way power does when it realizes it has to rebrand its memory. Daniel interrupted on slide 5. "My son was correcting an error that our dashboards have tolerated for months. This isn't fraud, this is maintenance." The chair lifted a hand, small but sufficient. "Let us finish." Slide 6, Policy Triggers, 9.2, 9.6. The words retaliation and protected activity appeared only once, as if the presentation feared spooking them. Then the last slide, recommendations. Immediate suspension of implicated access. External disclosure to client per contract clause 14.3. Temporary reassignment of VP Ops Authority pending review. Silence expanded, slow as a bruise. The chair turned her head finally toward me. "Ms. Marquez, anything to add?" I considered the room, the carpet thick enough to swallow a sound, the windows reflecting versions of ourselves that history would choose between later. I kept my hands folded. "No," I said, "the record is sufficient." The chair nodded once, an archivist closing a box. "Very well." Across the table, Ethan swallowed hard. Daniel looked at him, then at the recommendation line with his name inside it like a hair caught in glass. The CEO inhaled, readying a speech he hadn't practiced. But the most important sound was the smallest one. the click of the chief risk officer's mouse as she saved the deck to the board archive. The past tense, minted in real time. The chair lifted her gavel, not dramatic, more like a paperweight. "We'll adjourn for 10 minutes, she said. "Then we'll vote." I stood, quietly. Optional stands when the inevitable begins. As I reached the door, my phone vibrated once. External counsel has accepted the brief. Client notification scheduled for 1800 per clause 14.3. A procedural bell tolling exactly on time. I paused at the threshold. The city leaned against the glass, waiting. Behind me, the room filled with the soft friction of papers reordered when the story changes. Silence, at last, was doing its job. The boardroom lights dimmed just enough to draw everyone's faces into sharp relief, like portraits lit for confession. The city's reflection stretched across the glass wall, skyscrapers flickering like witnesses too polite to interrupt. The chief risk officer, Ms. DuPont, stood at the head of the table, calm, unapologetic, a surgeon, not a storyteller. Her tone was steady as she opened the file labeled Independent Findings, Project ValenCore. Per Protocol 9.2 and 9.6, she began, an external review was conducted on all data anomalies flagged within the ValenCore reporting system. The analysis spanned 12 months of activity and was performed by 2 independent audit firms. The results, she tapped the clicker, are unequivocal. Slide 1. A timeline appeared. Each modification time-stamped, each under the same user ID, E. Mercer. No one breathed. Login trails confirm the credentials originated from an unregistered IP address matching Mr. Mercer's home network, DuPont continued. This correlates with system access logs outside authorized hours, including one session recorded after project close. In total, she paused, 74 manual adjustments. The CFO blinked. 74? Documented and verified, she said. The adjustments altered deliverable metrics, creating false performance gains in Q4 reporting. Financial exposure? $7.3 million. A sound escaped from somewhere near the window. Half gasp, half cough. Ethan's hands were clenched tight in his lap. His father's face had gone pale, the kind of pale that doesn't fade with sunlight. DuPont advanced the slide. A new graph appeared, red bars spiking against a field of gray. Each unauthorized change was cross-referenced with the approval matrix. None received secondary sign-off. Daniel broke the silence. So he made mistakes. The system isn't perfect. You can't treat it wasn't the system, DuPont said. It was intent. The word landed with the weight of something final. She clicked again. The screen now showed an excerpt from a Teams message. E. Mercer. Don't worry, I'll fix the numbers before compliance catches it. Dad's got it handled. Timestamp, 22:41, Friday. The silence fractured. Someone muttered a curse under their breath. Daniel surged forward in his chair. That's out of context. He was... Context, DuPont said coolly, is exactly what the audit provides. Then she turned to the next page, the one that made even the CEO lean forward. Following the unauthorized edits, Ms. Marquez submitted a compliance escalation through proper channels. The report was filed within 12 hours, corroborated by audit trails, and preserved without breach of confidentiality. Legal confirmed all evidence chain of custody. Her eyes swept the room, resting briefly on me before continuing. For clarity, Ms. Marquez followed every required step. There is no indication of misconduct on her part. Daniel's expression collapsed, anger flickering into something more fragile. You're destroying careers over data." DuPont's gaze hardened. "We're protecting the company from fraud. That's the difference." A quiet voice broke from the corner. The chairwoman, "Proceed to recommendations." DuPont nodded, clicking one last time. Recommendations. Immediate suspension of Daniel Mercer, VP of Operations. Termination of Ethan Mercer, Analyst, pending legal review. External disclosure to client per contractual obligation. Reinstatement of compliance oversight under independent governance. The CEO rubbed his temples. Christ. The chairwoman folded her hands. "We'll vote." Daniel shot up. "You can't!" The chair's tone sliced through him. "We can, and we will." The vote was fast. 6 hands raised, 1 abstained. Daniel's fell last, not in protest, but defeat. DuPont closed the presentation. The sound of the laptop snapping shut was the only applause I'd ever wanted. I didn't gloat, didn't even shift in my chair. The outcome wasn't victory. It was verification. Ethan was the first to stand. His voice shook as he whispered, "Dad, I thought." Daniel didn't answer. He just stared at the table, fingers pressed against the grain as if trying to leave a mark. The chair turned to me. "Ms. Marquez, your resignation was noted. However, given the findings, we would like to discuss reinstatement." I met her gaze evenly. Reinstatement would require rewriting more than job titles. She gave a small, knowing nod. "Then consider this an open door." As the meeting adjourned, I gathered my folder, thin, uncreased, clinical. DuPont met me by the door. "You played it perfectly," she murmured, quietly. "Compliance isn't about noise," I said. "It's about sequence." When I stepped into the corridor, the air felt different, lighter, almost sterile. Behind me, the glass doors closed, muting the chaos inside. Ahead, the hallway stretched empty, lined with frame slogans that suddenly felt like satire. Integrity, accountability, vision. I reached the elevator, pressed the button, and watched my reflection in the brushed steel doors. Calm, whole, unapologetic. By the time the doors opened, my phone buzzed, an automated message from Legal's archive system. Subject: Audit file finalized. Status: verified. Immutable. Closed. I smiled faintly, because in the end, the truth didn't shout. It simply documented itself, line by line, signature by signature, until silence became undeniable proof. Daniel found me in the corridor outside the boardroom. He must have come straight from the vote, the door still swinging behind him, the echo of it still trembling in his voice. His tie hung crooked, his eyes glassed over with the kind of disbelief that doesn't quite know where to land. "You think this saves you?" he said. "I didn't know I needed saving," I answered. He stepped closer, lowering his tone until it was more hiss than speech. "You don't understand how this works. People forget. Today's scandal is tomorrow's strategy. You'll walk out of here with nothing but a reputation for insubordination." "I can live with that," I said. "Reputation's lighter than guilt." He laughed once, bitter and thin. "You think you've won some moral victory because you hid behind paperwork?" "No," I said. "I won because I didn't." The words stopped him cold. I watched him process them. The moment he realized the fight wasn't even in the same arena anymore. He'd been swinging at optics. I'd been documenting outcomes. Behind him, the elevator opened with a soft chime. Inside stood 2 men from legal and 1 from security, all politely neutral. They didn't have to say it. Everyone in this building knew what that combination meant. Daniel straightened, buttoned his jacket, and smoothed his sleeves. The ceremonial armor of a man about to lose authority, but not pride. "You think this company will remember you kindly?" "I don't need them to," I said. "The record already does." He stared for another second, searching for somewhere to aim the last of his anger, but I'd given him no opening. So he walked into the elevator instead, chin high, eyes forward, and disappeared behind mirrored doors that closed with the quiet finality of a signature drying. When the doors sealed, the hallway fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. I stood there a moment longer, not triumphant, not relieved, just still. There's a certain peace that follows when the noise stops trying to convince you it's music. I returned to my office to find a small envelope on my desk, unmarked, folded once, paper thick enough to be important. Inside, a single page. From the Chairwoman, to Elena Marquez. Subject, Acknowledgement of Resignation. Ms. Marquez, your resignation is hereby accepted, effective immediately. We thank you for your years of service and professionalism. Please note that your cooperation in the recent compliance matter has been duly recorded in the board archives. Signed, Margaret Ellison, Chair, Audit Committee. At the bottom, a handwritten line in ink, faint and deliberate. Some of us still believe in accuracy. M.E. It was the only human sentence I'd seen all week. I placed the letter inside my folder, not as a trophy, but as an artifact. Proof that restraint, when properly timed, becomes power. Outside my window, the skyline bled orange into gray. The city never cared who lost what battles inside these walls. It just kept reflecting whatever light was left. I took one last look around my office. The walls were bare now, stripped of the career souvenirs people mistake for identity. Certificates, client plaques, team photos taken by people who'd already forgotten them. Only my ceramic mug remained, cracked along the handle. I left it behind. Some things belong to the story, not the survivor. I packed my notebook, my USB drive, and the folder labeled Compliance Report Final Copy. Nothing else. On my way out, I passed Paula near the elevators. She looked uncertain, like someone approaching a witness she wasn't sure was free to speak. I read the audit summary, she said quietly. You were right. I was careful, I corrected. She hesitated. What will you do now? Something quieter, I said, still precise. She nodded, a little ashamed, a little awed. You made it look effortless. It never is, I said. It just looks that way when you do your preparation in silence. The elevator opened. The same guard from that night shift was at the lobby desk, head bowed over a crossword. He glanced up, smiled faintly. All done? Almost, I said. He gestured to the doors. Then congratulations. Leaving this building voluntarily puts you in the minority. Outside, the evening air was cool and unscripted. The revolving door spun once behind me, then sealed with the sigh of a closing chapter. My phone buzzed, an email notification. From the external auditor. Subject, findings submitted to client, case closed. Body, thank you for your thorough documentation and discretion. Outcome, corrective action implemented. Compensation review pending. I stood there on the sidewalk, unreadable to anyone passing by. Another professional, with a box and a purpose. Resignation wasn't defeat. It was punctuation, the kind that tells you the sentence is complete, and there's no need to say it twice. I walked toward the streetlights, the city humming beneath its own version of justice. Not loud, not cinematic, just consistent. Because in the end, truth doesn't announce itself. It files, it timestamps, It closes the loop. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. The kind that doesn't need witnesses, only record keepers. 2 weeks later, the city had already forgotten the Mercers. The press release went out under the headline, "Alaric Systems announces strategic leadership restructure." No names, no blame, just the sanitized poetry of corporate amnesia. A language I'd learned to translate fluently. But inside every euphemism, there's a scar, and the people who caused it never get to choose who remembers. I'd spent those 14 days in stillness. Mornings at a corner cafe on 17th, laptop open, black coffee cooling beside a growing stack of freelance compliance proposals. It was a clean kind of exile, freedom with deadlines. When the world removes your title, you rediscover your name. That morning, an email landed in my inbox. Subject, Inquiry. Independent Compliance Advisory. The sender, Margaret Ellison, Chairwoman, Audit Committee. Her message was short, almost gentle. "We're rebuilding our internal oversight division. I believe you'd design it better than anyone. If you're willing, the board would like to retain you as external consultant. Autonomy guaranteed." I stared at the text for a long time, the cursor blinking like it was breathing for me. I typed back 2 sentences. "Only if integrity precedes efficiency in your org chart. Otherwise, you don't need me." Her reply came 8 minutes later. "Agreed. The company has learned the cost of pretending otherwise." I didn't smile, but something inside me exhaled. The cafe's windows were fogged from the morning rush. Outside, buses hissed through puddles, and the city carried on, punctual, indifferent, honest in its way. A voice startled me from behind. "Ms. Marquez?" I turned. It was Marissa, holding 2 coffees, her coat unbuttoned against the cold. "I figured you'd be here," she said, setting 1 cup on my table. "News travels fast." Daniel's resignation made the rounds. "Officially or unofficially?" I asked. "Both," she said with a wry grin. "He's claiming health reasons. Ethan's disappeared, probably rebranding as a startup consultant somewhere in Palo Alto." I raised an eyebrow. "Nepotism's just venture capital with worse ethics." She laughed, then hesitated. "People keep asking how you pulled it off." "I didn't pull anything off," I said. "I followed the process they wrote and hoped they'd forgotten." "Still," she said softly, "you proved it works. The system, the truth, maybe even the quiet way of fighting back." I looked down at my coffee, the surface trembling from the vibration of passing traffic. Quiet doesn't mean weak. It means patient. She nodded, then added, "You know, they're calling the new compliance framework the Marquez model." I nearly choked. "That's terrible branding." "Maybe," she smiled, "but it's poetic." When she laughed, I reopened the folder on my screen labeled Legacy, Closed Cases. Inside were 4 documents: Marquez Report Audit 24B.pdf, ValenCore Findings, Verified Copy, Compliance Review Independent Summary, Letter of Acknowledgement, ME. I didn't need to read them. I just scrolled once, ensuring they were all still there, intact, time-stamped, alive in their quiet permanence. The truth doesn't age when it's recorded properly. It just waits for the next person who needs it. By evening, the sky had turned the color of graphite. The cafe emptied, leaving behind the smell of espresso and rain-soaked wool. I packed my laptop, slid the folder into my bag, and stepped outside. The wind carried faint echoes of construction somewhere, another office being built to house another generation of polished incompetence. I smiled faintly. Maybe this time someone would remember to check the logs before promoting a last name. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Heard what you did. Respect. Former Alaric engineer. No signature. No need. Word travels in whispers when justice is quiet. I stood at the corner, watching the traffic lights change with bureaucratic precision. Each signal, each cycle, everything documented, orderly, predictable. It felt right. People imagine revenge as noise, doors slamming, headlines screaming, enemies begging. But real justice rarely makes sound. It's a form being filed, a timestamp syncing, an audit closing without ceremony. I walked toward the subway, the city folding itself around me. The night smelled of wet metal and possibility. Somewhere behind me, a corporation was rewriting its ethics manual, one clause at a time. I didn't need to see it. I'd already written the precedent. When I reached the station, I stopped and looked up at the electric billboard above the entrance, glowing white letters against a black sky. Always verify, always document, always tell the truth. A compliance campaign, probably mine, rewritten by marketing to sound inspirational. I let out a quiet breath, half laugh, half prayer. Then I descended the steps, my heels clicking like a closing case file. Some victories are loud enough to echo. Others are simply permanent. And mine was time-stamped.